going? We're going. Right, okay, so just on Tobermory. And if you're watching this and you've not watched the Tobermory review, go back and watch the Tobermory review, because that's got the entire history about, I say the entire, a brief history about the distillery itself. And I'll quickly run through it in terms of, it was created by a guy called John Sinclair in 1798. The license was granted in 1823, so some of the marketing you'll see talks about it being established in 1823, others will say the actual official website itself talks about it being open in 1978. Closed and opened across a number of occasions, sort of ran until 1930, closed down because of Prohibition, didn't reopen until 1972, open, closed, open, closed, open, closed. Now owned by Burns Stewart, who also owned the Deanston distillery. They don't actually mature on the island, although I do have to touch on that in a second. They don't mature on the island, so they actually distill on Tobermory at the distillery. They use malted barley from the Port Ellen distillery on Islay. They distill on the island, but they then ship casks across to Deanston distillery, which they also own, and that's where they mature it. So, Tobermory itself was originally called Led-chek. That's how you pronounce it, not Ledaig, it's Led-chek. And the distillery itself, when it was first created by John Sinclair, was also called Led-chek, which is Gaelic for safe haven. And that's the name, that was the original name of the village, because that was the bay, it was a safe haven, it was one of, if not the safest bays in the Hebridean Islands. So, Led-chek was then, Tobermory is kind of a lightly peated whiskey. That was their stock of kind of, it was lightly peated, it was very smooth, it was very light and easy drinking. And I think it was Burns Stewart that actually introduced it. So Burns Stewart bought the distillery in 1991. I don't know when it was, because I couldn't see it anywhere, I couldn't read it anywhere as to when they launched Led-chek, but I'm fairly certain that Burns Stewart were the ones that launched Led-chek as a heavily peated version of Tobermory. And the reason for calling it Led-chek was because that was the original name, and it was harking, you know, kind of like harking back to how it was used to made, but it was the name, the brand name for it, because that was what the distillery used to be called. So this particular one was sent to be by my very good friend Ollie Chilton at the Whisky Exchange, and this is actually a bottling that the Whisky Exchange did. So this is what the bottle looks like. Now this was one that they produced for the Whisky Show last year, and it's cask strength 56.5%. Now basically Ollie sent me this. There is an official bottling of Led-chek, but it's tricky to get hold of. I wasn't sent a sample of it, and I had this, and I thought, you know what the hell, I'll go for it. I think the standard Led-chek is about a 10-year-old, and I think it's about 40 odd quid. I've no idea how much it is. In terms of how much this one is, I don't know, because the Whisky Exchange seems to be the only place that's selling it, as you would expect, because they made it, and they have it as out of stock. So how pricey it is or was, I have absolutely no idea. But it is a Led-chek nonetheless, and it is one that I can take off the list. So where's my jigger gone? Over here. So obviously 56.5%. I have some water ready because I will probably need to add some in. So heavily peated. Now apparently this one's quite heavily sherried as well, so it's probably first fill cask, something like that, and it is quite a decent colour on it. Not massively deep and rich, but now when I worked at the whisky shop, one of the USPs of the whisky shop as a chain was they used to, they still do, but they have casks in store that they would mature whiskey in, and essentially the casks are casks. They're not lined inside, they are actual wooden casks, because they were an absolute bitch to look after. And what we'd get was big plastic cubes of various stock of whiskies that we would then pour in the top, and we'd pour it out the bottom, out of a tap at the bottom of the cask, and bottle it up, and then handwrite pre-printed labels with the date of, we'd have the date of when it was distilled, and then we'd have that day's date when we filled it in. So people would come in and go, oh, can I have that? And if we had time to do it, we would then do them a bottle, and we'd write on the label today's date, and this is what's on it, and stick the label on and put it in a box. And that was like your personal whiskey, because it's had some extra aging in the store. Now, when the whisky shop moved from Scotland to England, so their first store outside of Scotland was at the Metro Centre in Gateshead, and that was where I first started working for them as an assistant manager. they actually had a bit of a discussion with the Scotch Whisky Association to say, well, look, you know, we are maturing these. We're not just putting them in a cask that's made out of plastic or is lined on the inside so it's not doing anything. This is an actual cask that we have in store. We had 5 of them in store. They said, well, technically, strictly speaking, if you're maturing it in England, you can't call it Scotch single malt whisky. The argument was that it was there for such a short amount of time because we'd keep selling it and keep emptying it that, you know, really was it going to make that amount of difference if it was going to be there for a month, say, that sort of thing. So eventually it was a case of, okay, we'll leave it as is. But that was one of the USPs. And one of the whiskies we had was a Led-chek, and it was a Led-chek 9-year-old as well. And that was one that we used to sell quite well for people that liked Islay but wanted something different. And it was like, well, if they like smoky peated whiskies, try this one. It's maturing in store. You can't get this anywhere else. You've got a handwritten label, that sort of thing. And it was, you know, it sold like hotcakes. And it was pretty potent. It was, you know, not massively peated, but it had a really good bite to it. And this has the same. Now, 56.5%, so you'd expect it to be a fair kick on the nose. But it's not too overpowering. And there's a definite log fire. It's log fire and earth. It's a really earthy character to it, but it's a very distinctive. It's not bonfire. It's not a garden bonfire. It's a log fire indoors at home. It's sort of a purer fire smell, but it's a little bit kind of getting the back of my nose as well. So. Okay, alcohol is definitely prevalent there, but the earthiness continues, and there is a sweetness to it. There's a rich sherried feel to it, and the peatiness, the smokiness that's on the nose, is there, but it's more distant. It's not as obvious as it was on the nose as it is in my mouth. It's more in the background. I'm getting alcohol, which I would expect, and the heat from that, and I'm getting a very rich sherried. Like very rich sherried mouthfeel to start with this peat kind of following up, not quite as clear as it was on the nose. It's very well balanced. Very, very interesting indeed. Now it does need water, so I'm going to add a few drops to it. This is one of the issues I have with cask strength whiskey. Is if you've got a bottle of it, then you can afford to kind of mess around with how much you need to put in to get it to your optimum level. But if you're only dealing with 25 mils and you're dealing with half of that, it's quite difficult. Now I'm going to take a little bit of water, simply because it feels like the alcohol is still burning the inside of my mouth a little bit. So I'm hoping I've got enough water in there and not too much. Yeah, that's opened it out better. That's really nice on the nose. The smokiness is there. More of a medicinal elements coming through. And again, it's log fires. It's log fires in the house. It's not a bonfire outside. It's a lovely earthy smell to it as well. I think I've got the water just about right as well. Bags of character on that. It's not as complex as a lot of Islay whiskies. It's a little bit more raw, but it's still got enough of a balance to it that it's not rough. It just feels more youthful. I mean, yes, it's 9-year-old. It's slightly younger than, you know, obviously a 10-year-old, but, you know, at 9, 10, 12, you can argue that they're much of a muchness. And this seems to have a bit more rawness to it while still being balanced. It's not rough, it's not edgy, it just feels slightly more daring. That sounds really poncy, doesn't it? Not quite getting my words out properly. I'm not quite getting it across well enough. It's this earthiness to it. It's just giving it slightly more character but a more kind of like feisty character to it. I really feel like I'm talking nonsense now. It's very, very interesting indeed. It stands alone from Islay whiskies, but it's sort of, you could group them together. You could probably have this in a tasting blind, and a lot of people would say, oh yeah, it's definitely an Islay whiskey. But if you said, what distillery is it from? For people that know Islay whiskies, and they're like, oh, I'm an Islay expert, you could put that on and they go, yes, that's an Islay. What distillery is it from? Oh, not sure. Not quite sure. And that's what I mean in terms of, you know, it matches Islay whiskies, it stands up against them, but it's this earthiness to it and this fire that's not really medicinal, and it's not the bonfire smokiness that you get with Islay's. It's more of a log fire, it's more purer, but I don't know whether that's not saying it's better than Islay, it's just a slightly different version of. Very, very interesting indeed. I think it might be that sherried element as well, because there is an underlying sweetness to all of it. It's good stuff. Really, really good stuff. Right, that's me done. That's Mull done. I've got one more island to go, and then I think we're going to carry on with Highlands. So you should be able to figure out what the remaining island is, if you haven't seen the list on my list of whiskies page. Which, if you haven't seen that, then it will be a complete mystery to you. Right, I'll see you at the next one. Cheers.